Film Photography Podcast. My name is Michael Rosso. We're here to talk about film photography, and I'm joined today by Mr. Matt Marash
Hey, what's going on, guys?
and our super special guest, Mr. Josh Steele.
How's it going?
How you doing, Josh? And Josh is from Roberts Distributors. And Josh is going to jump into the conversation. Well, what is the conversation? Well, the conversation today is DSLR mirrorless scanning, hot, and traditional flatbed scanners, not. The reason I'm turning this over to Matt, because Matt hits the ground running every day at Midwest Photo Exchange, where he's on the ground floor of what's going on in retail, the pulse. So make believe I know nothing, Matt. What is this stuff?
Sure. So, we've been chatting about digitizing film for over a decade now on FPP. And like our answer up until now has always been like Epson V700 or Epson V850, like that's it. That's all there is. And there's definitely more in between options. But anymore, if somebody is looking at a scanner and they've never done this before, you've got like your V500s, V600s, which are like your $200 scanner, and you kind of hit a ceiling with those pretty quick. And then it jumps all the way up to a V850. They actually don't make the V800 anymore. So you jump from $200 to $1,200 instantly. There's no real middle ground. And if you're a photo enthusiast, you probably already have, if you're doing stuff like we're doing, where you're streaming or talking or chatting or Zooming, you probably have some sort of camera that has a pretty good chip on it and has like an interchangeable lens. If you are somebody that has a DSLR or mirrorless camera that is capable of manual exposure modes or aperture mode, and you can adapt a macro lens like an older one, or you can get a native macro lens on there, there's a good chance all you'll need is a light source, something to hold the film flat, and something to hold the camera, and you can start digitizing that film using the camera you might already have. So that's kind of a segment that has really, really come up quickly. I would say probably people have been doing it for a while, but it's really become convenient with some of these newer products entering the market within the last 2 or 3 years. And it seems like every time I open up my browser, there's another new holder or another new product that's out there that's trying to aid the process. And it's something I'm trying to get a little bit better with too, both at work and at home, because the backlog like never ends, Mike. It's only getting bigger. So taking a digital camera and adapting it to making scans a little bit quicker, because we're at the point now where unless you're doing like 100% everything analog for that reason, most people have some sort of hybrid workflow. If you want to share your work or send it off to somebody who's going to print it with some digital means, it makes sense to be able to archive that digitally. Now, one thing that is definitely out there, and I wouldn't say it's at the entry side of the market, but it's definitely one of the more convenient systems that's out there. Josh, you guys over at Roberts have a really, really cool product line that kind of appeals to someone that's trying to get this stuff done digitally.
Yeah. I think your point, Matt, is exactly right. We're kind of at a weird crossroads for the scanning solution, or a digital scanning solution, in that the range of flatbed scanners is thin. For those who have always loved trying to figure out how to digitize things, there's always been the real old, Nikon scanners or Paycons or drum scanners that people used to be able to find at Goodwill for $60, and now if you can find them, they're $2,500, and you also need a Windows 95 computer to run them. But at the same time, the DSLR scanning idea has gotten simpler, less intimidating, and more commonplace as an idea to think about the workflow. So yeah, Negative Supply is a group of guys that have kind of come together to try to make it even less intimidating and offer more premium solutions than some of the MacGyvering that some of us have been doing for years to try to make this a legitimate workflow. So, they, other than the camera and the lens, they offer a premium solution for every other piece of the puzzle, whether that's the light source, or what they call a riser, what some of us call a copy stand, and then also various negative holders. Their 35 millimeter holder is also, and their 120 solution, both work to do full rolls quickly, as opposed to some of the other solutions we've all used to hold negatives flat and take one or two scans at a time, then slide your film around and readjust and refocus your lens and do all that painful thing. So they're really the premium options that, you know, when you stop and look at what it would take to get into a V850 versus a full solution there's I think a lot more reason to think about using SLRs or mirrorless cameras to hybrid your workflow.
Yeah, and when we were at the PDN show in 2019, and we went to the Roberts booth, I know AJ was there, kind of demoing some stuff. Oh, it was Saxon there too? Were both of them there?
Both guys, yep, both of them were there. Yep.
Yeah, what you guys were demoing, and I think what really would appeal most to someone that shoots a lot of 35. So that's the other thing too. It's how much you're shooting of it, but
yeah,
the holder will take a whole uncut roll, and this makes sense for someone that's doing a lot of film. You don't have to cut and sleeve and then figure out how many you have to cut so it fits in the tray or whatever. You send the whole roll through, and even though you're advancing it manually, you can be done with a roll of film in a little over a minute or two.
Yeah, I've gotten to where now, especially on my black and white, which, you know, I home develop all of it, and it's gotten so my workflow has really changed from letting a pile of film, you know, not even get developed until I've got 20 or 30 rolls. And then once I do develop it, just letting it hang there and dreading the scanning process, to now between options like Lab Box and then negative supply, I'll shoot a roll, walk downstairs, develop it, let it hang for 20, 30 minutes and scan it. And really in all that time, probably have, you know, 15 minutes into a roll. And if I've got a few rolls to do all at once, so much the better. But the actual scanning portion for the negative supply 35 millimeter scanner, you can easily have, especially black and white film or slide film even, scanned and processed, you know, with your default settings in a minute, 2 minutes a roll. It's really that simple.
People who are moving over to film or sharing their photography with some digital and film, it makes sense because these folks already own the DSLR.
Exactly.
So that piece is already in place, and then it's finding the various components to do it. I don't know if it's generational, because forever we were pushing the flatbeds of like, oh, you want to scan? Flatbed scanner. Like, it wasn't even a question.
No.
And it seems that you know, in the last few years, there have been a lot of people making innovations and actually inventing things. And it's really awesome because also all these items are coming from independent sources. They're not coming from major companies. It's not like Kodak is introducing it or Ilford's introducing it. I mean, or camera manufacturers are not introducing this. They're coming from people who are actually shooting, saying, hey, I have an idea. This would be a great product. So to see last year at the PDN of the guys demonstrating the negative supply scanner, I don't want to take this for granted. I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, I think this whole element of the market does give me even as much hope as seeing guys like you finding and keeping emulsions going, because, you know, we've all seen at least two looming technological, I wouldn't say crises maybe, but issues for film shooters, which is, you know, the one that's often on people's mind is, hey, these cameras we're using are really old, right?
Oh, yes.
And we still, we're seeing, I think, a growing rallying cry to see how that solution can be fixed. And I'm more and more confident that it will be, based off of what I'm seeing happening on the scanning side. And while even fewer of us think about the scanning problem, it's just as big a problem, because if you want digital scans, don't take for granted that the stores and the labs that you have your film developed by are using hardware and software that is growing older by the day with no replacement in sight. And so to see companies like Negative Supply, and even some of the software guys that are film shooters that are making the plugins to take your scan and convert it easily in Lightroom or in Photoshop, it's incredible. To me, it's very encouraging. It's grassroots. You know, these guys made their first 35 millimeter scanner through a Kickstarter campaign. They're still, you know, using Kickstarter to kind of gauge interest and get projects off the ground. And the reality is, this industry is supporting them. And so we're seeing premium solutions come to the market at affordable prices for an issue that really needed to be solved pretty quickly in this industry. So I think it's great to see it happen.
I could imagine a Negative Supply being in a institution like a school, because think of how many kids, I mean, they have their own DSLR. So if you have the setup there, you know, a student checks in, makes the time available, goes in, does his or her scans, boom, as we say in New Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, we're even seeing people, you know, from our used Photo Pro side of things, start to buy just a dedicated SLR to leave on the riser, because you can do something as simple as a Canon T3i or a T4i.
Little Rebels are fine.
Exactly, and get, you know, a cheap kit macro lens, or buy something like you know, the 7 Artisans lenses, or just, I mean, a manual macro lens, because it's set it and forget it once you've got everything locked in place. And the same thing for institutions. You know, you can leave the tether hanging out of the camera and just have somebody plug in their computer and go to town without even, you know, without thinking about it any more than you would plugging into a flatbed scanner or trying to take your floppy disk to your old Nikon 9300 cool scan or something.
Since last year, when I saw you guys demoing it, what has been the retail reaction to the product? What's the pulse on the product from a retailer perspective?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see who gets it and who we still need to be kind of evangelizing to on these kinds of new products. I kind of fully expected some of the shops around the country that are very focused on new, younger, engaged analog shooters to be the first to really get why this matters, and that's been true. Some shops that aren't your standard broad-based photo specialty retailer, but are instead only focused on film, really get why this product matters. But the other thing that I've seen that I really wasn't expecting as much are the retailers that have your professional job-based photographers that have been at this for 30, 40 years, who are looking for the best possible quality and efficiency to a digitizing workflow, who are seeing, oh, this is, you know, from the 35 millimeter to the 120 to the large format to the really nice light panels. This is the solution that's basically future-proofed for how I can get extremely high resolution scans that I can then, you know, tinker around with for the rest of my life. So there's a much greater audience from those professional shooters that have shot mostly digital now for the past 10 years, but did shoot analog for 20, 25 plus years, who really want to make sure they've got the best solution for that. And that's been fun to see. It's a part of the analog industry that I don't think about as much naturally, because they they've in some ways left film behind, even though they think about it with sentimental thoughts. They're all looking at, you know, shooting the next Olympics or that big safari or whatever these guys are doing. But when you get to look at their old scans with them and think about how to improve that process and make them aware of plugins and workflow and hardware solutions like negative supply, it kind of brings a twinkle back to their eye and go, and even some of them, I don't know why I did stop shooting this way if it's this easy to get this kind of result in the end. So it's been
Right.
a fun thing to be a part of.
It would be very interesting if this type of scanning actually revitalizes film photography from the perspective of archiving. When I say that, I mean that when you're shooting your films, and we've been talking about this on the FPP for 10 years, of you're shooting something that you own. And when I say you own it, I mean you have that negative, and that negative is going to survive for could be 80, 90 years, your entire life, and then some. Whereas there's still the big file management hard drive crash.
Yep.
You know, that, you know, you're still with your negatives, you still have your negatives. And I'm curious if shooters, people who were shooting film, are thinking of actually re-embracing film, and if new shooters, digital shooters, are saying, hey, I want this archival medium, my negatives, and wow, look at this, the great way we can scan, you know, using a DSLR. And also, the other thing I'm thinking about is that, from what I'm hearing from both you guys, is that, you know, something like the negative supplies, Josh, you're telling me that the quality is as good as a Epson V800 or 850?
Yeah, I mean, what you're able to do with, again, like we said, even your average Rebel, when you think about, I know we've talked megapixels to death in the world of digital photography, but when you can shoot a 35 millimeter or a 120 negative in raw format, to bring into Lightroom and use a macro lens, you're talking about you're grabbing everything, from that negative.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're not worrying about the other static that you are bringing in, which is always, between dust and age and software updates and all those kinds of issues that you're dealing with flatbeds. There's a lot of, even though the intimidation factor is what seems high on the front end for DSLR scanning, the actual, once you get just the bare essentials of what you really need to make this happen, there's no upkeep or maintenance, or you just go, and for those of us that have been working in Lightroom for years anyway, it feels like a very, very natural workflow. I think that's maybe the big difference, even bigger than the hardware, is the software side of things. What happens when that image is brought into your computer? And for most of us, we were just happy to use whatever magical process Epson had for us with a flatbed. I find an incredible amount of enjoyment in first seeing that image as a negative and then turning it into what I expected it to be. Right.
That's pretty awesome. And I see this catching on. Do you see either Matt or Josh? There are a handful of indies producing these products. Do you see, is there going to be like a market grab? Is a bigger company going to wake up and say, oh my God, there's a product here? What is there going to be, a scanning war of products? What's going to happen?
I don't know. That's a good question, Mike. I do know that like Nikon's aware of it, because when they had the D850 come out, they actually put some stuff into the firmware of the D850. I don't know if they put it into the mirrorless ones or not, but in the D850, you can actually buy a scanning adapter for some of their macro lenses. and it just goes right on the front, and there's a specific spacer for it. It's kind of like their own solution, but it's really kind of the same plastic holder that you would find on like an Epson scanner, but it attaches right to their macro lenses. But the camera, when put into the right mode, it's JPEG only, unfortunately, but it will invert color negative and black and white negative into a positive in camera. So if you have one of those and you have some sort of thing like the negative supplier, you're doing your own DSLR scanning, I think manufacturers are going to become more aware of it. I don't know that they're going to develop products as much as they might develop plugins or firmware updates that can support that. I think that might be the direction it goes.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And the Nikon example is exactly what I thought of. My expectation would be that probably our camera manufacturers, I'm thinking especially Nikon and Panasonic come to my mind, but I mean, I'm just throwing that out there, are going to be aware that people are using this device for this purpose and make it easier to modify your settings to fit that purpose. Not that it's hard for anyone right now to use them for that, but it'd be great to, you know, pop on your macro lens and say, I want this in digital scan mode, and see what a Nikon or a Sony or a Panasonic could do with that. As far as actual dedicated hardware, you know, I doubt that the industry is there, but I do think for many of these guys with their software potentials, it'd be an easy and worthwhile addition for them to make over time.
Do you see, like, you know, Midwest Photo, places like Unique Photo, various, you know, bigger camera stores starting to offer classes of how to use these devices?
Yeah, actually, so scanning is a series of classes I've got coming up for the winter, because that's when we all kind of look at our backlog and go, uh-oh, what do I do now? So usually it's not forced lockdown. There's always winter that kind of locks us down too. That's we have to take a look and see, oh, should I do this? So I have some hybrid type classes. They're going to be in person, limited number of seats in person, as well as broadcast online, where people can learn how to manage their workflow. We'll talk about, I have one class where it's scanning like prints and negatives, so just preserving your memories. And then we'll also have one with some of those simple like Elgato video capture devices where you kind of have to sit there and watch your video footage roll through, either from your high 8 tapes, or we also have one of those reel-to-reel ones as well for like the 8mm. But it's important to be able to do that. So there's also, like, I think what's cool about this is it doesn't just hit the enthusiasts. Like, enthusiasts are going to drive it for sure, but for every one of us enthusiasts, there's someone that's doing it in a practical sense. They already have the family camera, right? Maybe it is a Rebel T5 or something, but now they also are the family historian because they have the family camera. So now they're going to be digitizing all the old slides and prints. So it makes sense to be able to offer a solution that has as little friction as possible, but can get you some good quality. And from like a services standpoint, well, at Midwest Photo, we're already getting ready to, not, I wouldn't say convert everything over to the DSLR and mirrorless, but we are now offering mirrorless scans with our roll film, because we have a solution with with an old copy stand. Like, we looked in the back when we were doing inventory, and there was this awesome copy stand that we were going to throw out to the curb.
Yeah,
and it's perfect. We already sell LED light tables, so we just set and it's a perfect demo. People are like, wow, how can I do that? Well, here's the macro lens. Here's the 7 Artisans macro lens. Here's the Sony A7R for high resolution. Like, it's just as much a selling tool as it is here's a selling tool, a teaching tool, and also we're just providing better services with it. So, Mike, on the Ace, like the one that we're using, so we are definitely going high end with it, but we have an A7R4 at work that we have hooked up to it. That's a 60 megapixel full frame chip. Even a really bad scan of some 35 millimeter, I did some Dracula 35 scanned with that. It shouldn't be possible, but you can like see the grain pretty sharp with a 60 megapixel scan, single capture of 35. You cap out at like 20 some megapixels on an Epson, and it takes all day for it, right? If you hit the highest resolution, if it doesn't kick you out eventually,
walk away.
You got to come back 2 hours later.
Do the lawn, whatever you need to do.
Exactly. And
go
this
to
is
work,
like,
come back, it's still going.
Exactly. And hope to God the cat didn't jump on it or something when you were gone. Yeah. So like, this is a Oh, that's another thing. Like your scanner has to like hold perfectly still. It can get
Yeah.
hurt in transport. There's so many things that can go wrong, and we don't know about them until it happens. With this camera setup, there's more moving parts, but once they're in place, it's very solid compared to like how easy it is to bust up a scanner. So there's a lot of advantages there, and the resolution you can get out of it, especially, and if you want to do a raw file with it, great. You've got even more you can work with. So I would say it's almost too much. Like you don't want to deliver someone that just wants, like, if they're used to lab scans that are like 4 to 6 megapixel, you're not going to give them a 200 gigabyte TIFF or whatever of of their picture. But like giving them something that looks higher quality, that's going to keep, it's going to keep your customer base for it too. They're like, wow, this is awesome, this came from that slide. So it's just better service too.
I'd agree with that. I mean, in some ways, some of these scans they're so unexpectedly good when I got into this part of the workflow that it's like seeing 1080p for the first time,
Yep.
10 years ago. You're like, oh, wait a minute. I thought I was seeing, that football game before, and now I'm seeing the football game. And the same is really true for what you can do now with a DSLR workflow. It's just night and day different. And I expect many retailers and labs to do exactly what Midwest is doing over time, to offer, standard scan, forget it, set it and forget it type options, and also high res scanning options for those that whether they're professional or just real enthusiasts, want to be able to have that kind of resolution to work with down the road. And PSA for young enthusiasts, because when Phil from the Darkroom told me this a couple years ago, I was horrified. They often get requests to save on return shipping by not getting their negatives back. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I mean, I know that I'm preaching to the choir, to the FPP audience. None of this is possible if you do not have a negative. And even as we talk about digitizing, it's never with the goal of chucking my binders. Always keep your negatives. The beauty of an easy digital workflow is that they're always there to digitize, but I'm still never counting on my digital image. I mean, negatives are negatives. Don't ever let them go.
I forgot about that. It doesn't even come in my day to day that the thought that there are people out there spending their hard-earned cash shooting film, and they're using a lab that's not returning their negatives. Like, it doesn't even, I forget it exists.
Yeah, and if I didn't make that clear, the Darkroom is so opposed to that idea. There's no part of their mind that says, no, we would never do that. You're getting your negative back whether you want it or not. The thing that's just shocking to me is that someone would say, I don't want it. It doesn't compute for me. And I understand. Listen, I understand not everyone is going to print their images, although I would say print your images. But to get rid of the negative because you've got the picture on Instagram is to get rid of the actual picture. So don't ever get rid of your negatives, no matter where you think that end project was supposed to go. And even if you got it there, the negative is the image.
Yep. Any last thoughts on the topic of DSLR and flatbed scanning?
I just can't wait to see where it goes from here. I think it's only going to get more convenient. I think there's going to be some cool phone solutions that come out too, with like this new crazy iPhone 12 stuff. The thing's shooting RAW now. Like, the tools are only getting smaller, cheaper, more powerful. And as more people jump into this space and say, oh, it's cool when you come from a different discipline, you can look at something with a fresh set of eyes and say, oh, well, why don't you just do it like this? And guys like us have been doing the same thing forever. We can't see it because we've never thought of it that way. So this is another important reason to get new people into film photography, is so we can get these new ideas kind of sloshing around with all these old ideas.
Yeah, I to jump on to what Matt said, I think we're just now, at the point where the cost to value and the simplicity factors make this the time to really, I think maybe even I'd go so far as to say for most people to look at SLR scanning as the best way to digitize your negatives. But I also think we're at the very front end of what's going to make this really kind of the mainstream solution going forward in terms of what I've seen guys working on for automating, for starting a 35 millimeter roll and then walking away while a 3D printed belt drive solution turns a negative supply or whatever it might be. There's all kinds of guys working on that, and I think all of that will be mainstream, well, as much as film is mainstream in the coming months and years. And it's a pretty cool time to just jump on board and start to work this way.
Terrific. Folks out there watching and or listening can leave comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or drop us a line, podcast@filmphotographyproject.com. I'd be happy to forward your email to these fine folks sitting in with us. And thanks, guys. This is a great topic, and I'm sure that we will revisit it soon.
Always love talking.
Yes, this is cool to talk about because it's only getting better, and we're going to learn things too with everybody at home as they're trying this out. So share your results.
Great.